Commander Sarah Mitchell pushed through the heavy glass doors of Murphy's Tavern, the smell of stale beer and fried food hitting her like a wave. She'd driven 3 hours from Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado, California, to this dive bar in San Diego for one reason: complete anonymity. After 18 months of nonstop operations, classified briefings, and the weight of commanding America's most elite warriors, she needed to disappear for a few hours. The bar buzzed with typical Friday night energy. Groups of young sailors clustered around high tables, their laughter mixing with the steady thrum of classic rock from a jukebox. Sarah chose a corner stool where the lighting was dim and the crowd was thin. She ordered a whiskey, neat, and let herself sink into the blessed ordinariness of it all. For the first time in months, no one was asking her to approve a mission that would send men into harm's way. No encrypted phones were buzzing with updates from operators in hostile territory. No Joint Chiefs were demanding her presence at emergency briefings. Here, she was just another patron nursing a drink and trying to forget the day. Sarah had earned her place through 22 years of service that began as an enlisted sailor scrubbing decks on destroyers. She'd fought her way through every rank, every training program, every assignment that others said was too dangerous for women. When the Pentagon finally opened SEAL support roles to female officers, she was the first to qualify. When they needed someone to coordinate between SEAL teams and naval intelligence, she became indispensable. When budget cuts threatened to reduce SEAL operations, she testified before Congress with such fierce precision that funding was not only maintained but increased. 3 years ago, when Admiral Patterson announced his retirement as commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, Sarah's name was the only one on the short list. The appointment made international headlines, not because she was the first woman to hold the position, though she was, but because her track record of successful operations spoke louder than any political statement. Under her command, SEAL Team 6 had eliminated 3 high-value terrorist targets in Somalia. Teams 3 and 8 had rescued hostages in Syria while suffering 0 casualties. Her tactical innovations in underwater demolition had been adopted by allied forces worldwide. The men under her command didn't follow her because they had to. They followed her because she'd proven time and again that her decisions brought them home alive. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was just Sarah, a woman who'd worked too many consecutive 14-hour days and needed to remember what normal felt like. She was halfway through her second whiskey when she noticed him. A Marine corporal, judging by the insignia on his uniform, was making his way through the bar like he owned the place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly intoxicated. His voice carried over the ambient noise as he made crude comments about every woman who crossed his path. "Look at that one," he said loudly to his buddies, pointing at a young Navy ensign trying to enjoy a quiet drink with friends. "Bet she's never seen real action." His friends laughed uncomfortably. Some tried to pull him toward their table, but he was building momentum now, feeding off the attention. Sarah watched as several women moved away from the bar, their evenings ruined by one man's inability to conduct himself with basic decency. The bartender, a grizzled veteran who'd probably seen every kind of military drama play out at his establishment, kept serving drinks, but his eyes tracked the Marine's movement. Sarah could see the calculation happening: when to intervene, when to call security, when to just hope the problem sorted itself out. Sarah turned back to her drink, trying to maintain her anonymity. She'd dealt with men like this throughout her career. Usually, she had the authority of rank to shut them down immediately. Tonight, she was nobody, just another civilian in jeans and a simple black jacket. The Marine's voice grew louder. "Military women," he announced to anyone within earshot. "They think they're tough until they meet real Marines. Navy girls especially. They play soldier in their little boats while we do the real fighting." A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. The young ensign and her friends gathered their purses and headed for the door. Sarah watched them go, feeling the familiar anger that came with witnessing injustice she couldn't immediately address. But the Marine wasn't finished. He'd spotted his next target. "What about you, sweetheart?" he called out, his attention now fixed on Sarah. "You look like you could use some company from a real warrior." Sarah didn't turn around. She took another sip of her whiskey and hoped he'd move on to easier prey. He didn't. Heavy footsteps approached her corner of the bar. She could smell him before she saw him. Beer, sweat, and the unmistakable arrogance of someone who'd confused volume with authority. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the Marine said, now standing directly behind her stool. Sarah met the bartender's eyes in the mirror behind the bar. The older man gave her a questioning look, ready to intervene if she wanted him to. She gave the slightest shake of her head. "Not yet. Sorry," she said without turning around, her voice calm and controlled. "Just try to enjoy a quiet drink." "Quiet?" The Marine laughed, and she could hear his buddies approaching behind him. "What's the fun in quiet? Come on, let me buy you a real drink. Show you what you've been missing." "I'm fine, thanks." The rejection seemed to surprise him. Sarah guessed he wasn't used to women turning him down, especially women who looked like civilians. In his mind, she was probably some office worker or teacher who should be grateful for his attention. "Look, lady," his voice had an edge now. "I'm being nice here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Now Sarah did turn around. She studied his face for a moment. Young, maybe 23, with the kind of confidence that came from basic training and too many war movies. His uniform was crisp, his bearing was correct, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of someone who'd never actually been tested. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, her tone still level, but with an underlying firmness that made his friends take a step back. The Marine either didn't notice the warning in her voice or chose to ignore it. Instead of backing down, he moved closer, invading her personal space with the deliberate aggression of someone used to intimidating others. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his breath hot with beer and belligerence. "You've never been with a real man. All these Navy boys around here, they're soft. But Marines? We know how to handle women like you." The bar had gone noticeably quieter. Other patrons were watching now, some pulling out phones to record what they sensed might become an incident. The bartender had his hand near the phone, ready to call security. Sarah finished her whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding respect in rooms full of men who thought they were tougher than her. "Son," she said, the single word cutting through his bravado like a blade, "you have absolutely no idea who you're talking to." For the first time since he'd approached her, the Marine seemed uncertain. Something in her tone, in the way she held herself, didn't match his assumption about who she was supposed to be. "Is that supposed to scare me?" he asked, but there was less confidence in his voice now. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements controlled and purposeful. She wasn't a large woman, but there was something in her bearing that made her seem to take up more space than her frame suggested. Years of command presence, of walking into rooms full of skeptical officers and making them believers, had taught her how to project authority without saying a word. "It's not supposed to do anything," she replied. "It's just a fact." The Marine looked around, suddenly aware that his friends had stepped back and the entire bar was watching their interaction. His face flushed red, whether from alcohol, embarrassment, or anger, Sarah couldn't tell. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are." "That," Sarah interrupted quietly, "is exactly the problem." Before he could respond, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her wallet. From it, she extracted a simple military ID card and placed it on the bar where he could see it. The Marine's eyes widened as he read the card. His face went through several rapid changes of expression, confusion, disbelief, and then a growing understanding of just how badly he'd miscalculated. The ID read, "Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command." For a moment, the only sound in the bar was the distant jukebox and the quiet hum of conversation from patrons who couldn't see what was happening but sensed the tension. The Marine stared at the ID, then at Sarah, then back at the ID. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "You're—" he started, then stopped. "I'm the officer who commands every Navy SEAL in the United States military," Sarah said calmly, "including the ones who train Marines like you in advanced combat techniques, including the ones who've been covering your six in every major operation for the past decade, including the ones who could be here in 20 minutes if I made a single phone call." The color drained from the Marine's face. His friends had backed away entirely now, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. Sarah picked up her ID and returned it to her wallet. She pulled out a $20 bill and left it on the bar for her drinks. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued, her voice still conversational, but carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "You're going to apologize to every woman in this bar that you've harassed tonight. Then you're going to go home, sober up, and think very carefully about how a Marine is supposed to conduct himself in public." The Marine opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "And if I ever hear about you disrespecting servicewomen again," Sarah added, stepping closer so only he could hear her next words, "I'll make sure your commanding officer learns exactly how you represent the Corps when you think nobody important is watching." She stepped back and spoke at normal volume again. "Do we understand each other, Corporal?" The young Marine straightened to attention reflexively. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, son. Those Navy girls you were disparaging, some of them command ships. Some of them fly fighter jets. Some of them have more combat experience than you'll see in your entire career. Next time you want to question someone's toughness, make sure you know what you're talking about." She walked toward the door, the crowd parting automatically to let her pass. Behind her, she could hear the Marine stammering apologies to the few women still in the bar, his voice shaking with embarrassment and the sudden understanding of how close he'd come to ending his military career. As Sarah reached the exit, the bartender called out, "Commander, your drinks are on the house." She turned back and nodded her thanks, but her mind was already moving beyond the incident. In a few hours, she'd be back at headquarters, back to the weight of command and the responsibility of keeping America's finest warriors mission ready. But for one night, in one small bar, she'd reminded someone that respect isn't negotiable. And sometimes the most important battles happen when nobody expects them. The drive back to Coronado gave Sarah time to decompress, but she knew the evening's incident wouldn't end at Murphy's Tavern. Word traveled fast in military circles, especially when it involved public confrontations between service members of different branches. By the time she pulled into her driveway at 2 a.m., her secure phone had already buzzed twice with messages from her chief of staff. Sarah lived in a modest ranch house 5 minutes from the base, a deliberate choice that kept her close to her command while maintaining some semblance of a normal life. The house was spartanly furnished, but comfortable, with military precision evident in everything from the aligned books on her shelf to the perfectly made bed she never seemed to sleep in. She poured herself a glass of water and checked her messages. The first was from Captain Rodriguez, her deputy commander. "Ma'am, social media is lighting up about an incident at Murphy's. Need to discuss damage control." The second was from Admiral Patterson, her predecessor and mentor. "Sarah, heard you had an interesting evening. Call me when you get this." She knew Patterson well enough to hear the mixture of concern and amusement in his tone, even through a text message. He'd been the one to recommend her for the position when he retired, and he'd warned her that every public appearance would be scrutinized differently because of who she was. But before she could return the calls, her doorbell rang. Sarah checked the security camera and was surprised to see Master Chief Petty Officer James Harrison standing on her porch. Harrison was one of her most trusted advisors, a 30-year veteran who'd served with SEAL teams in every major conflict since Panama. If he was here at this hour, something significant had happened. She opened the door to find Harrison looking unusually uncomfortable. "Master Chief," she said, "this is either very good news or very bad news." "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Always." Harrison stepped inside and immediately got to the point. "The Marine you encountered tonight? Corporal Danny Walsh. He's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Sarah felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Investigation for what? His commanding officer at Pendleton received 3 separate reports about the incident within an hour of it happening. Seems like half the bar was recording video on their phones. By midnight, it was all over military social media. She sank into a chair, suddenly, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. "I never wanted this to become a circus, Master Chief." "Ma'am," with respect, it became a circus the moment he opened his mouth. "You just happened to be there to shut it down properly." Harrison pulled out his tablet and showed her a video posted to a military spouse Facebook group. The angle wasn't great, but the audio was clear enough to hear Walsh's crude comments and her measured response. The thing is, Harrison continued, this isn't an isolated incident. Walsh has been written up twice for inappropriate conduct toward female Marines at Pendleton. His platoon sergeant has been trying to counsel him for months, but he keeps pushing boundaries. Sarah watched the video again, studying Walsh's body language and the reactions of the other patrons. What kind of investigation are we talking about? Full behavioral review. His CO wants to know if this is a pattern that could affect unit cohesion and readiness. The Marines take this stuff seriously now, especially after the scandals at Parris Island. She understood. The military had spent the last decade overhauling its approach to sexual harassment and assault prevention. Zero-tolerance policies that once existed only on paper were now being enforced with career-ending consequences. What seemed like a simple bar confrontation could easily escalate into a much larger issue. There's more, Harrison said carefully. The base commander at Pendleton called Admiral Chin this morning. Seems like Corporal Walsh's uncle is Congressman Frank Walsh from Ohio. Sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Now Sarah understood why Harrison had driven over at 2 in the morning. Political complications always made military discipline more complex, especially when they involved inter-service incidents and commanding officers with high profiles. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Admiral Chun, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, and her immediate superior. I'll take this, she told Harrison. Stay here. We may need to coordinate our response. Admiral, she answered. Sarah, I assume you know why I'm calling. The incident at Murphy's Tavern. Among other things, I got 3 different calls from Pentagon brass asking me to explain why my SEAL commander is getting into bar fights with Marines. Sarah felt her temper flare. With respect, Admiral, I wasn't in a bar fight. I was defending myself and other women from harassment by an intoxicated Marine who was completely out of line. I know that, and frankly, good for you. But perception matters, and right now the perception is that we've got an inter-service incident involving a congressman's nephew and social media videos. What's the Pentagon's position? Officially, they're waiting for a full report. Unofficially, they're concerned about how this plays in the media. Your appointment was controversial enough with some members of Congress. This gives them ammunition if they want to make trouble. Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. She'd known from the day she took command that her every action would be scrutinized differently than her male predecessors. The bar incident was exactly the kind of thing her critics would use to question her judgment and temperament. What do you need from me, Admiral? Complete report on the incident. Timeline, witnesses, your assessment of the situation. And Sarah, I need it to be thorough. If this goes political, we need to be able to defend every decision you made. After she hung up, Harrison was already pulling up files on his tablet. I took the liberty of doing some research on Corporal Walsh, he said. Want to know what I found? Sarah nodded. 23 years old, enlisted right out of high school in Ohio. Basic training at Parris Island, then infantry training at Camp Lejeune. Deployed once to Iraq with the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit. No combat action, mostly security and convoy escort duties. Family connections? Uncle Frank Walsh has been in Congress for 12 years. Sits on armed services and defense appropriations. Strong supporter of Marine Corps funding. Vocal critic of women in combat roles. The political implications were becoming clearer. If Congressman Walsh decided to make this a public issue, he could frame it as an example of why women shouldn't be in command positions. A Navy officer using her authority to humiliate a young Marine could easily become a talking point about female military leaders being emotional or vindictive. There's something else, Harrison continued. I did some checking with my contacts at Pendleton. Walsh has been struggling since his deployment. Classic signs of adjustment issues, but he's been refusing counseling. His squad leader thinks he's been drinking too much and acting out to prove he's tougher than he really is. Sarah understood. She'd seen it before, young Marines and soldiers who came back from deployments feeling like they hadn't proven themselves, compensating with aggressive behavior and poor decision-making. It didn't excuse Walsh's conduct, but it explained it. What's your recommendation, Master Chief? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Ma'am, you did exactly what any good officer should have done. You protected other service members from harassment and corrected unacceptable behavior. The fact that it happened off duty and out of uniform doesn't change that. But, we need to be smart about how we handle the aftermath. This could either be a teaching moment about proper conduct and respect, or it could become a political weapon used against the entire integrated combat program. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message, this one from her public affairs officer. Ma'am, Washington Post defense correspondent just called asking for comment on the Murphy's Tavern incident. Need guidance on response. The story was already beyond their ability to contain it. Within hours, it would be national news, and Sarah's response would be dissected by military analysts, political commentators, and social media critics. She looked at Harrison. Give me everything you can on Walsh's service record and his unit's deployment history. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with before this gets any bigger. Already done, ma'am. He handed her a thick folder. Complete service jacket, plus interviews with his squad members and platoon leadership. The picture that emerges isn't pretty. Sarah opened the folder and began reading. Corporal Danny Walsh had enlisted with high expectations and modest capabilities. His test scores were average, his physical fitness was adequate, and his leadership potential was rated as limited. During his Iraq deployment, his unit had seen minimal action, spending most of their time on routine patrols and checkpoint security. But the psychological evaluation notes told a different story. Walsh had volunteered for multiple high-risk assignments that his chain of command had denied. He'd expressed frustration about missing real combat and had made several statements about proving himself as a warrior. His squad leader noted concerning comments about women in the military being distractions and safety risks. The pattern was clear. Walsh was a young man struggling with an identity crisis, trying to reconcile his self-image as a tough Marine with the reality of his limited combat experience. His behavior at Murphy's Tavern was consistent with someone overcompensating for perceived inadequacy. Master Chief, Sarah said after reading through the file, I want you to reach out to Walsh's commanding officer. Not officially, just a professional courtesy call. Let him know that if his Marine needs help dealing with adjustment issues, we've got programs that might assist. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You want to help a Marine who harassed you? I want to help a troubled young service member before he ruins his career and hurts other people. What happened at Murphy's was unacceptable, but destroying him won't solve the underlying problem. And if the media finds out you're advocating for him, then they find out I believe in rehabilitation over retribution. That's the kind of leader I am, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Harrison smiled. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly why your people would follow you anywhere. As he gathered his materials to leave, Sarah was already planning her next moves. She would write a complete and accurate report about the Murphy's Tavern incident. She would cooperate fully with any investigation. But she would also use this as an opportunity to address larger issues about respect, professionalism, and the responsibilities that came with wearing the uniform. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Admiral Patterson. Sarah, are you okay? I'm fine, Admiral. Just dealing with the fallout. Listen, I've been getting calls from old friends at the Pentagon. This thing has legs, and not necessarily in a bad way. There are a lot of senior officers who are glad someone finally stood up to this kind of behavior publicly. And the political side, Congressman Walsh is making noise, but he's in a difficult position. Hard to defend his nephew's behavior when there's video evidence of what actually happened. My sense is that if you handle this professionally and don't let it become personal, it could actually strengthen your position. Sarah looked out her window at the Pacific Ocean, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. In a few hours, she'd be back at headquarters, briefing SEAL team leaders on upcoming operations and reviewing intelligence reports from around the world. The incident at Murphy's Tavern will become one more challenge to manage alongside all the others. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Sometimes leadership meant making tough decisions in conference rooms and situation rooms. Sometimes it meant standing up to drunk Marines in dive bars. Either way, the principles were the same. Do what's right, accept the consequences, and never back down from defending your people. The sun was beginning to rise over Coronado as Harrison left. Sarah had 2 hours before she needed to be back on base. Just enough time to write her report and prepare for what would certainly be a very interesting day. The secure conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters had seen many crisis meetings, but few as politically charged as the one convening at 0800 Monday morning. Sarah sat at the head of the polished table, surrounded by her senior staff, public affairs officers, and 2 JAG lawyers who'd been flown in from Washington overnight. The Washington Post story had broken at 0600, just as Sarah predicted. The headline read, "Navy SEAL Commander Confronts Marine in San Diego Bar." The article was factual, but incomplete, focusing on the dramatic confrontation while missing the broader context of Walsh's behavior pattern. By 0700, it had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. Captain Rodriguez, her deputy commander, pulled up the media coverage on the main screen. CNN led with it on Morning Express. Fox News is framing it as military discipline versus political correctness. MSNBC is calling it a powerful example of women leaders standing up to harassment. In other words, Sarah observed dryly, everyone sees exactly what they want to see. Commander Lisa Park, her public affairs officer, was frantically typing on her laptop. "Ma'am, we've got interview requests from 67 media outlets so far. That includes all 3 major networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and about 40 print and online publications. Recommendation? Complete media blackout until we understand the Pentagon's position. Anything you say can and will be used against you if this goes political." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, one of the JAG lawyers, leaned forward. "Commander, from a legal standpoint, your actions were completely within bounds. You identified yourself as a military officer, corrected inappropriate behavior, and de-escalated the situation without physical confrontation. Any investigation will conclude you acted properly. But legal vindication and political survival are 2 different things. Congressman Walsh is already mobilizing his allies on armed services. We're hearing he plans to request a full congressional review of your fitness for command." Sarah had been expecting this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. Frank Walsh was a powerful voice on military policy, and his influence extended far beyond his home district in Ohio. If he decided to make this a personal crusade, he could create enough political pressure to force her removal from command. Master Chief Harrison spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been monitoring military social media since dawn. The reaction from active duty personnel is running about 90% in your favor. SEAL teams especially are rallying behind you. Team 6 posted a statement calling you the finest officer they've ever served under." That meant something. Navy SEALs weren't known for empty gestures or political correctness. If they were publicly supporting her, it was because they genuinely believed in her leadership. Her phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Chun. "Pentagon briefing in 1 hour. Attendance required." "I have to go to Washington," Sarah announced to the room. "While I'm gone, I want complete operational continuity. Rodriguez, you have the con. Harrison, coordinate with team leaders to ensure all scheduled operations proceed normally. Park, no media statements until I return." The flight to Washington gave Sarah time to review the political landscape she was about to enter. Congressman Frank Walsh had built his career on strong defense positions and traditional military values. He'd been one of the most vocal opponents of women in combat roles, arguing that integration would reduce effectiveness and unit cohesion. The incident with his nephew played perfectly into his existing narrative. But Sarah also had allies in Congress. Senator Patricia Morrison from California had been a Navy pilot before entering politics, and she chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee. Representative James Chun from Hawaii was a former Marine who'd consistently supported military modernization and integration efforts. If this became a political battle, the lines were already drawn. The Pentagon briefing room was packed with more brass than Sarah had seen in one place since her confirmation hearings. Admiral Chun was there, along with the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and 2 Deputy Secretaries of Defense. The tension in the room was palpable. Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams got straight to the point. "Commander Mitchell, I need to understand exactly what happened at Murphy's Tavern, and I need to know how you plan to address the political fallout." Sarah had prepared for this moment. She stood and delivered a clear, factual account of the evening's events, emphasizing Walsh's pattern of harassment, her measured response, and the de-escalation that prevented the situation from becoming physical. She spoke for exactly 10 minutes, answering every question with precision and refusing to be drawn into speculation or emotional responses. When she finished, the Commandant of the Marine Corps spoke first. "Commander, I want to be clear that Corporal Walsh's behavior does not represent Marine Corps values or training. His actions were inappropriate and reflect poorly on our institution." "Thank you, General Morrison. I appreciate that clarification." However, Morrison continued, "There are concerns about how this incident is being portrayed in the media. Some are suggesting that you used your authority to embarrass a junior enlisted Marine in a public setting." Sarah felt her temper rise, but kept her voice level. "General, with respect, I used my authority exactly as any officer should when witnessing unacceptable behavior. If Corporal Walsh felt embarrassed, it was because his actions were embarrassing." Secretary Williams raised a hand to prevent further discussion. "The immediate issue isn't what happened. The footage makes it clear that Commander Mitchell acted appropriately. The issue is how we manage the political response." "What kind of political response are we expecting?" Sarah asked. "Congressman Walsh has called for immediate hearings on your fitness for command. He's also questioning whether the SEAL commander position should be held by someone with emotional volatility and poor judgment in public settings." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. A drunk Marine harassing women in a bar was somehow less concerning to Walsh than a female officer calmly addressing the harassment. "Secretary Williams, may I speak freely?" "Please do. This isn't really about what happened at Murphy's Tavern. It's about whether women belong in command positions in special operations. Congressman Walsh opposed my appointment from day one, and this incident gives him ammunition to revisit that decision." "Are you suggesting we should ignore legitimate congressional oversight?" "I'm suggesting we don't let political theater override operational reality. My teams have had 0 mission failures under my command. Our readiness ratings are at all-time highs. Our interagency cooperation has never been better. If Congress wants to review my performance, they should look at results, not manufactured controversies." Admiral Chun leaned forward. "Sarah, what's your assessment of the situation with Corporal Walsh himself?" "He's a troubled young Marine who made a serious error in judgment. His service record suggests ongoing adjustment issues that should have been addressed months ago. Rather than destroying his career, we should focus on getting him the help he needs." The room fell silent. Sarah knew she was taking a risk by advocating for the Marine who'd caused this mess, but it was consistent with her leadership philosophy. Secretary Williams studied her for a long moment. "You're recommending we help the Marine who created this problem?" "I'm recommending we address the underlying issues that created this problem. Corporal Walsh is a symptom, not the disease. If we want to prevent future incidents, we need to look at how we identify and assist service members who are struggling with identity and adjustment issues." The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Peterson, spoke for the first time. "Commander Mitchell, that's an interesting perspective. Can you elaborate?" Sarah outlined her analysis of Walsh's service record and psychological profile, explaining how his limited combat experience and family pressure had created a perfect storm for the kind of overcompensation behavior witnessed at Murphy's Tavern. "My recommendation is that we use this incident as a teaching opportunity. Show the country that military leadership means taking responsibility for all our people, even the ones who make mistakes." When the briefing ended, Sarah was asked to remain behind for a private conversation with Secretary Williams. "Commander, I'm going to be direct with you. There are people in this building who think you should be reassigned to a less visible position until this blows over. And your assessment, Madam Secretary?" "My assessment is that you're exactly the kind of leader we need more of, not less. But I also know that perception matters in politics, and right now the perception is that you might be more trouble than you're worth." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Secretary Williams, I've spent 22 years proving that women can serve effectively in any military role. I'm not going to start backing down now because a congressman's nephew can't handle his alcohol." Williams smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say. Here's what we're going to do. You're going back to Coronado, and you're going to continue doing your job at the highest level. When Congress calls hearings, we're going to be ready with performance metrics, operational successes, and testimony from your subordinates that makes it impossible to question your competence. And Congressman Walsh is about to discover that attacking a war hero with an impeccable record is more difficult than he anticipated, especially when that war hero has the backing of every SEAL team in the Navy. As Sarah flew back to California, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been an anonymous officer trying to enjoy a quiet drink. Now, she was the center of a national debate about women in military leadership. But she'd been through worse. She'd survived combat deployments, congressional confirmation hearings, and the daily challenge of commanding America's most elite warriors. She could certainly survive a political fight with a congressman who'd never worn a uniform. Her phone buzzed with a message from Master Chief Harrison. "Ma'am, Team 3 just returned from Syria. Mission accomplished, 0 casualties. Thought you'd want to know." That was what mattered. Not political theater or media coverage, but the men and women who put their lives on the line every day under her command. As long as she kept bringing them home safely and accomplishing the mission, she could weather any storm Congress threw at her. The plane descended toward San Diego as the sun set over the Pacific. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was going home to command the finest warriors in the world. Everything else was just noise. 3 weeks after the Murphy's Tavern incident, Sarah found herself sitting at a witness table in the Hart Senate office building, facing the House Armed Services Committee. The hearing room was packed with media, military personnel, and spectators who'd been lucky enough to secure gallery passes. Camera flashes popped constantly despite the no photography rule, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Congressman Frank Walsh sat at the center of the committee table, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expression set in what Sarah recognized as performative outrage. He'd spent the previous weeks giving interviews about the concerning pattern of aggressive behavior exhibited by female military leaders and questioning whether emotional volatility made women unsuitable for command positions in special operations. Sarah wore her dress blue uniform with full decorations. The silver star on her chest caught the television lights, a reminder of the operation in Afghanistan, where she'd coordinated the rescue of 12 hostages while under enemy fire. Next to it hung the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, and ribbons representing 2 decades of exemplary service. To her left sat Admiral Chun, her immediate superior and steadfast supporter throughout the controversy. To her right was Captain Maria Santos, a JAG officer who'd been specially assigned to help navigate the political minefield of the hearing. Congressman Walsh called the hearing to order with what Sarah could only describe as theatrical solemnity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to examine the conduct of Commander Sarah Mitchell and to determine whether her actions reflect the kind of leadership we expect from officers commanding our nation's most elite military units." Sarah had reviewed Walsh's biography extensively in preparation for this moment. The man had never served in the military, despite coming from a family with a long tradition of Marine Corps service. His father had been a decorated Vietnam veteran, his grandfather had fought in Korea, and his nephew Danny had enlisted partly to continue that tradition. Walsh's own lack of service seemed to drive an overcompensation in his political career, making him one of the most hawkish voices on military policy despite having no actual combat experience. "Commander Mitchell," Walsh began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a politician who'd mastered the art of righteous indignation. "On the evening of December 15th, you engaged in a public confrontation with a United States Marine at a civilian establishment. Is that correct?" "Yes, Congressman. I responded to inappropriate behavior directed at myself and other female patrons." "Responded how exactly?" Sarah had practiced this testimony dozens of times, but the hostile atmosphere of the hearing room still felt surreal. "I identified myself as a military officer and corrected behavior that was inconsistent with military standards of conduct. You humiliated a young Marine in front of a crowd of civilians. I corrected inappropriate behavior in the manner any responsible officer would." Walsh leaned forward, clearly enjoying the theater. "Commander, wouldn't you agree that there's a difference between official military discipline and personal confrontations in civilian settings? Captain Santos had prepared Sarah for this line of questioning. The implication was that she'd overstep her authority by addressing Walsh's behavior while off-duty and out of uniform. Congressman, the obligation to maintain military standards doesn't end when we remove our uniforms. When I witness a service member behaving in a manner that brings discredit to the armed forces, my duty as an officer is clear regardless of the setting. But you chose to escalate the situation rather than simply walking away. Sarah felt her temper rise, but kept her voice measured. I chose to protect other women from ongoing harassment and to address behavior that reflected poorly on all service members. Walking away would have been a failure of leadership. Walsh shuffled through his papers with obvious satisfaction. He'd clearly expected Sarah to become defensive or emotional, and her calm responses seemed to frustrate him. Commander, let's talk about your overall fitness for the position you hold. You command approximately 2,500 Navy SEALs. Is that correct? That's correct. And how many of those SEALs are women? Sarah knew this was a trap. Currently, there are no female SEALs, Congressman. Women are not yet eligible for direct combat roles in SEAL teams, though that policy is under review. So you command an exclusively male force. I command America's premier Special Operations Force, which happens to be composed entirely of men due to current policy restrictions. Don't you think there's something inappropriate about a woman commanding men in the most dangerous military operations our country conducts? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Sarah could see Admiral Chun stiffen beside her, and she heard murmurs from the gallery. This was the real issue Walsh wanted to address. Not her conduct at Murphy's Tavern, but her very presence in a command position. Before Sarah could respond, Senator Patricia Morrison interrupted. As chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, she had the authority to recognize points of order. Congressman Walsh, I have to object to that line of questioning. Commander Mitchell's gender is not relevant to her qualifications for command. Her performance record, operational results, and leadership effectiveness are what matter here. Walsh's face flushed red. Senator Morrison, this committee has the right to examine all aspects of an officer's fitness for command, including whether that officer possesses the temperament and judgment required for such a critical position. And we're examining those aspects, Morrison replied coolly. But suggesting that gender disqualifies someone from command contradicts decades of successful integration in the military and ignores the objective evidence of Commander Mitchell's effectiveness. The exchange revealed the deeper political battle being fought. Morrison was positioning herself as a defender of women's advancement in the military, while Walsh was appealing to voters who remained uncomfortable with female military leaders. Representative James Chun, the former Marine from Hawaii, requested permission to question the witness. His approach was entirely different from Walsh's theatrical hostility. Commander Mitchell, can you provide the committee with specific examples of operational successes under your command? Sarah had prepared extensively for this question. In the 18 months since I assumed command, SEAL teams under my direction have conducted 47 successful operations across multiple theaters. These include the rescue of American hostages in Somalia, the elimination of high-value terrorist targets in Syria, and the disruption of weapons trafficking networks in Southeast Asia. Our mission success rate is 98%, with 0 friendly casualties in direct action operations. How does that compare to historical averages? The mission success rate under my predecessor was 94%, with an average of 2.3 friendly casualties per year in direct action operations. She nodded approvingly. And how would you characterize the morale and readiness of the units under your command? Recent readiness assessments show SEAL teams at the highest operational capacity in their history. Retention rates are up 12%, and interagency cooperation ratings have improved significantly. Perhaps most importantly, the men under my command report high confidence in the mission planning and strategic direction provided by my headquarters. Have any SEAL team leaders expressed concerns about serving under female command? This was dangerous territory, but Sarah knew her answer would be verified. Representative Chun, I have never received a complaint or concern from any SEAL team leader regarding my gender or my fitness for command. In fact, I've received numerous commendations from team leaders praising the quality of intelligence, mission planning, and operational support provided by my staff. Walsh interrupted, clearly frustrated by the direction of the questioning. Commander, let's return to the incident that brought us here. Don't you think your reaction to Corporal Walsh's behavior was excessive? No, Congressman, I do not. You destroyed a young man's career over a few inappropriate comments in a bar. This was Sarah's opportunity to redirect the narrative. Congressman, Corporal Walsh's career was not destroyed by my actions. His career was damaged by his own choices and his failure to seek help for the adjustment issues that multiple superior officers had identified. Adjustment issues? Yes, sir. Corporal Walsh's service record shows a pattern of concerning behavior that began during his deployment to Iraq. His commanding officers had recommended counseling for anger management and alcohol abuse, but he declined treatment. The incident at Murphy's Tavern was the culmination of months of escalating misconduct. Walsh looked uncomfortable for the first time during the hearing. He clearly hadn't expected Sarah to have detailed knowledge of his nephew's service record. Are you suggesting that my nephew has psychological problems? I'm suggesting that Corporal Walsh is a young Marine who is struggling with issues that many veterans face, and that rather than addressing those issues constructively, he was allowed to continue a pattern of behavior that ultimately led to the incident in question. Senator Morrison leaned into her microphone. Commander Mitchell, what happened to Corporal Walsh after the incident? Senator, I'm pleased to report that Corporal Walsh entered a comprehensive counseling program designed to address adjustment issues and alcohol abuse. His commanding officer reports that he's making excellent progress and is expected to return to full duty within 6 months. So rather than destroying his career, you helped save it. That was always my intention, Senator. My goal was never to punish Corporal Walsh, but to ensure that he received the support he needed to become the Marine he's capable of being. The revelation clearly surprised many in the hearing room. Walsh had spent weeks portraying his nephew as a victim of Sarah's vindictive behavior, but the reality was more complex. Representative Chun asked the critical question, Commander, did you play a role in arranging Corporal Walsh's treatment? Yes, sir. I contacted his commanding officer and recommended specific programs that have proven successful with veterans experiencing similar adjustment challenges. I also arranged for him to speak with SEAL team members who've dealt with post-deployment issues. The room was completely silent now. Sarah had revealed that rather than seeking revenge against the Marine who'd humiliated her nephew, she'd actively worked to help him recover his career. Congressman Walsh's face was now bright red, and his voice shook with anger. You had no right to interfere in Marine Corps personnel matters. I had every right to ensure that a struggling service member received appropriate support, Sarah replied calmly. And I had an obligation to prevent future incidents by addressing the underlying causes of inappropriate behavior. Senator Morrison smiled. Commander Mitchell, this is exactly the kind of leadership we need more of in our military. Taking responsibility not just for mission success, but for the welfare of all service members, regardless of branch or rank. As the hearing continued, it became clear that Walsh's strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of portraying Sarah as an emotionally unstable female officer who'd overreacted to a minor incident, he'd inadvertently highlighted her compassionate leadership and commitment to helping troubled service members. The final question came from Representative Chun. Commander Mitchell, if you could send one message to young women considering military service, what would it be? Sarah looked directly into the television cameras for the first time during the hearing. I would tell them that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the most aggressive personality. Real leadership is about taking care of your people, making tough decisions based on principles rather than politics, and never backing down when you know you're doing what's right. The military needs leaders of all backgrounds, and there's room for anyone willing to serve with honor and dedication. When the hearing ended 3 hours later, Sarah knew the political battle was far from over. But she also knew she'd achieved something important. She'd shown the country that female military leaders could be both strong and compassionate, both decisive and caring. As she left the hearing room, Master Chief Harrison was waiting in the hallway with a message that made her smile. Ma'am, Team 6 just radioed from Afghanistan. Mission accomplished. They wanted you to know they're proud to serve under your command. That was worth all the political theater in Washington. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Sarah stood in the same briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command where this journey had begun. But today was different. Instead of crisis management and damage control, she was conducting a routine operational briefing with her team leaders, discussing upcoming training exercises and deployment schedules. The political storm had passed, leaving behind a military that was stronger and more unified than before. The hearing's aftermath had generated thousands of supportive messages from active duty and veteran service members across all branches. More importantly, it had sparked genuine conversations about leadership, accountability, and the changing face of America's military. Master Chief Harrison entered the briefing room with a folder marked confidential and an expression Sarah had learned to associate with either very good news or very complicated situations. Ma'am, I've got updates on several fronts. You're going to want to see this. The first document was a letter from General Morrison, Commandant of the Marine Corps. Sarah read it twice before fully processing its contents. Corporal Walsh has been recommended for promotion to sergeant, she announced to the room. His commanding officer reports that he's become one of the most effective squad leaders in his company since completing the counseling program. Captain Rodriguez smiled. That's outstanding news, ma'am. How's he doing personally? Harrison pulled out a second document. Actually, we received a personal letter from Walsh himself. He asked his CO to forward it through official channels. Sarah opened the handwritten letter, noting the careful script and formal military language. Commander Mitchell, I know I have no right to ask for your time or attention after what happened at Murphy's Tavern, but I wanted you to know how much the counseling program you recommended has helped me. I spent months angry at everyone except the person who really needed to change, myself. I've learned that being a Marine isn't about proving how tough you are by putting other people down. It's about being strong enough to lift other people up. I've apologized to every woman I disrespected that night, and I'm working every day to be the kind of Marine my uniform deserves. I also wanted you to know that when my squad talks about leadership, we talk about you. Not because of what happened in the bar, but because of what you did afterward. You could have destroyed my career with a single phone call, but instead you helped me save it. That's the kind of leader I want to become. Respectfully, Sergeant Daniel Walsh, United States Marine Corps. The room was silent as Sarah finished reading. She'd received hundreds of letters of support during the controversy, but this one meant something different. This was proof that leadership could transform lives, even in the most unlikely circumstances. There's more, Harrison continued, pulling out an official document with Pentagon letterhead. Secretary Williams wants to see you in Washington next week. Something about a new assignment. Sarah studied the orders. A meeting with the Secretary of Defense rarely meant routine business, especially when it was classified at the highest levels. Any idea what this is about? Rumors are flying, ma'am. Everything from promotion to Joint Task Force Command to completely new initiatives. But the SECDF's office isn't talking. The flight to Washington gave Sarah time to reflect on the unexpected turn her life had taken. What began as a simple night out had evolved into a national conversation about military leadership, gender integration, and the values that define America's armed forces. She'd been tested in ways she never anticipated, but she'd emerged stronger and more confident in her convictions. The Pentagon meeting was held in a secure conference room she'd never seen before. Secretary Williams was there, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and several officials Sarah didn't recognize from their uniforms and civilian clothes. Commander Mitchell, Secretary Williams began, I want to start by saying that your handling of the recent controversy has been exemplary. You've shown exactly the kind of leadership and character we need in senior positions. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Which brings us to why you're here. We're creating a new position, and we want you to fill it. The chairman leaned forward. Sarah, we're establishing the Office of Military Leadership Development. It's going to be responsible for identifying, training, and mentoring the next generation of military leaders across all branches. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of assignment that came once in a career, if ever. Secretary Williams continued. The position carries the rank of Rear Admiral and reports directly to my office. You'd be responsible for developing leadership programs, addressing integration challenges, and ensuring that our officer development keeps pace with the changing nature of military service. The incident with Corporal Walsh showed us something important, the chairman added. We need leaders who can handle complex situations with both strength and compassion. Leaders who can transform problems into opportunities and turn critics into advocates. Sarah considered the offer carefully. It would mean leaving operational command of the SEALs, something she'd never imagined doing voluntarily. But it also represented an opportunity to influence military leadership development on a scale she'd never dreamed possible. What will be my first assignment? Redesigning the curriculum at all service academies to include comprehensive leadership training focused on diversity, inclusion, and adaptive leadership, Secretary Williams replied. We want to graduate officers who can lead effectively in any environment, with any team composition. You'd also be developing new programs for identifying and addressing the kind of adjustment issues we saw with Corporal Walsh, the chairman added. Prevention rather than reaction. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The drunk Marine who tried to humiliate her in a bar had inadvertently created an opportunity to revolutionize military leadership development. I accept, she said without hesitation. The promotion ceremony was held at Naval Special Warfare Command, with every SEAL team leader in attendance. As Admiral Chun pinned the Rear Admiral stars on her shoulders, Sarah looked out at the assembled faces. Men who'd served with her, learned from her, and trusted her with their lives. Master Chief Harrison stepped forward with the final surprise of the day. Ma'am, the teams wanted to present you with something. He handed her a framed photograph showing all 2,500 Navy SEALs under her command, arranged on the beach at Coronado with a banner reading, "Thank you for showing us what leadership looks like." And there's one more thing, Harrison added with a grin. Corporal, excuse me, Sergeant Walsh asked if he could attend the ceremony. He's here as the official representative of the Marine Corps. Sarah turned to see Danny Walsh in his dress blue uniform, standing at perfect attention with tears in his eyes. He approached and saluted with military precision. Rear Admiral Mitchell, he said formally. Sergeant Walsh reporting to pay respects. She returned his salute and then extended her hand. Congratulations on your promotion, Sergeant. Your commanding officer tells me you're setting an excellent example for your Marines. Ma'am, I learned from the best. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah prepared to leave Coronado for her new assignment in Washington, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. A routine evening at a dive bar had become a defining moment, not just for her career, but for military leadership development across all branches. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Admiral Mitchell, this is Captain Jennifer Walsh, Army Medical Corps. I'm Danny's sister, and I just wanted to thank you for what you did for my brother. He's a different person now, and our family will never forget your kindness. Also, I'm applying for a position with your new Leadership Development Office. I hope we can work together to help other service members the way you helped Danny. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Captain Walsh, I look forward to working with you. If you're anything like your brother has become, you'll make an excellent addition to our team. 1 year later, the Office of Military Leadership Development had become one of the most successful innovations in modern military education. The program Sarah developed had been adopted by NATO allies and was being studied by military organizations around the world. Sergeant Walsh had been selected for Officer Candidate School and was on track to become a second lieutenant. His transformation from troubled Marine to exemplary leader had become a case study in the power of intervention and support. And in a small bar in San Diego, Murphy's Tavern had put up a plaque commemorating the night that changed military leadership forever. It read simply, "Leadership means standing up for what's right, no matter who's watching." Sarah's story had begun with a simple question. Do you know my identity? The answer, as it turned out, was far more complex and important than anyone could have imagined. She wasn't just a Navy officer or a SEAL commander or even a Rear Admiral. She was a leader who understood that true strength comes from lifting others up, not putting them down. And in the end, that made all the difference. The legacy of that night at Murphy's Tavern lived on in every young officer who learned that leadership wasn't about rank or gender or branch of service. It was about character, compassion, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Sarah Mitchell had answered the question about her identity in the most powerful way possible, through her actions, her values, and her unwavering commitment to making the military and the country better for everyone who chose to serve. In a world that often seemed divided by differences, she had shown that the uniform brought people together around shared values of service, sacrifice, and honor. And sometimes the most important battles were won not on foreign battlefields, but in the quiet moments when leaders chose to build bridges instead of walls. The night a Marine bumped into her at a bar, thinking he knew who she was, he learned something far more important. He learned who she could help him become. And in the process, they both discovered that identity isn't just about who you are, it's about who you choose to be and how you use your position to make others better.